Hello and welcome to the Elements of Deep Sea Mining. I'm Eric Young. Today I'm joined by Dr. Helen Rosenbaum of the Deep Sea Mining Campaign. Helen has been working in science-based advocacy on deep sea mining since her early encounter with community concerns about Papua New Guinea's Solwara 1 mining project in the late 2000s. We discuss the important role of advocacy in the deep sea mining conversation, how the conversation has developed in the years that she has been active in it, and why she supports a complete ban, not a moratorium, on deep sea mining.
No amount of deep sea mining is the perfect amount of deep sea mining, zero deep sea mining. And I say that, it sort of sounds a bit glib, but I say that based on 13 years of looking at the science around the impacts of deep sea mining as it's been slowly emerging.
A quick note, due to a technical issue on my side, we lost audio in the final few minutes of the conversation. I'll provide links to the resources she recommends at the end of this episode. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Helen Rosenbaum. Thanks for being with me today, Helen.
Pleasure. Eric?
If you could just start us off with your story, tell the listener where you come from and how and when you got involved in the issue of deep sea mining.
Well, I live in Australia. I live in Queensland, Australia. We've just dodged a cyclone, actually, just as a bit of side interest where I live. But it does bring one's relationship with the ocean quite into focus. There's nothing like kind of a cyclone coming in from the coast to do that. I have a PhD in medical research, and from after doing that, I spent some time working as a marine toxicologist. And I've always been interested in that link between marine health, human health, and the impacts that us as humans cause on the environment in general, but particularly on the ocean environment. So I guess with that as a background, I got involved with a campaign and led the campaign here in Australia for an organisation called the Australian Conservation Foundation against the Octedi mine in Papua New Guinea. And that was my first foray into advocacy as a researcher. And since that time, really, I have been undertaking what we would describe really as evidence or science-based advocacy. So it's a combination of doing the research, finding the facts, putting together a comprehensive report as a resource, both for ourselves so that our campaign is informed and a wider audience as well to inform more widely. So I think fairly early on in the piece, I realised that in order for advocacy to be successful, especially if it's about a project that's situated and having impacts in a particular community, whether it's here in Australia or in Papua New Guinea or anywhere in the Pacific, which is mainly been the focus of my work, it's important for communities to be part of that. Over several decades, I have really flip-flopped between and combined, I guess, community development with environmental advocacy. And so I actually came to learn about deep sea mining through working as a community development consultant for an organisation in Papua New Guinea, in the islands of Papua New Guinea, in East New Britain. And working with an organisation called East New Britain Social Action Committee, I met people from the Duke of York Islands who came in for a workshop and were pretty concerned and stressed about this deep sea mining project called the Solwara 1 project. And from that time, I guess I've been pretty switched on to deep sea mining, and we started off as a campaign focused on the Solwara.
Sorry, can you just, when was that you were working in Papua New Guinea and this was an issue?
Probably about 16 years ago. So that was probably one of the last times I worked with that organisation.
Mm.
So that played on my mind. So it was probably a few years after that I was still thinking about this deep sea mining project, and I started working with Mining Watch Canada as their deep sea mining person with a budget of I think it was 100 Canadian dollars for communications. But
Amazing.
I just really wanted an organisation I could belong to in order to do some more delving and research into this project, the Solwara 1 project in Papua New Guinea. And I guess for me personally, I worked on the Octedi mine, which is in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. I worked as the Pacific Program Manager for an organisation called International Women's Development Agency also. So I had a really strong connection with Papua New Guinea and with organisations that were working in Papua New Guinea. So it was quite easy for me to collaborate with organisations there who I already had a relationship of trust with, and to develop up an approach with them to address this issue of Solwara 1. The first thing we did was to actually put together reports. So it was quite a comprehensive report called Out of Our Depth, Deep Sea Mining in Papua New Guinea. And that was the first report our campaign produced. And it actually preceded us becoming a campaign, because at that time there was a collection of us collaborating who I still collaborate with in Papua New Guinea. For example, the Centre for Environmental Law and Community Rights, which is a really important public interest environmental legal organisation, and with Mining Watch Canada. And we were supported by Oxfam Australia in doing this work as well. And the idea was just to put together a really solid information base as a resource for Papua New Guinean organisations to then develop their campaigns around Solwara 1 with. Papua New Guinea is one of these countries that are often described as having the resource curse. The civil society in Papua New Guinea are dealing with so many impacts from oil palm, from land-based mining, from oil and gas extraction. So they didn't really, and logging, I should mention logging, that forestry and logging is a huge issue. Deforestation is a huge issue for Papua New Guinea as well, and a very sad one. So we were asked to help develop a campaign as a result of this, and then this collection, this motley crew of us developed, kind of morphed into actually the deep sea mining campaign.
And so this Solwara 1 was kind of the first actual commercial or intended commercial deep sea mining operation. And you happen to be already just kind of on the ground working with community groups in land-based mining as well as other things when that happened. So that's why you were kind of involved right at the beginning of this.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, maybe just tell a little bit about what the deep sea mining campaign does, just kind of generally. You started the organization. You said this first report you did was the tipping off of the organization. So you've been there from the beginning. And what has that organization done since?
There were three of us that really started the organisation. We didn't really expect us to become an organisation or a campaign, and otherwise we probably would have picked a more exciting name than the Deep Sea Mining Campaign. But so right from the start, we focused on science-based advocacy and community solidarity and capacity building with communities on the ground in Papua New Guinea. And those two aspects have become like really strong components of our work 13 years later to today. And on top of that, about 6 years ago, we added finance advocacy because we perceived the need that another strategy was required to address the risks of deep sea mining. And to be perfectly honest, our agenda is to stop deep sea mining. So our third strategy is to lobby banks and insurance companies to develop policies that exclude their services to the deep sea mining industry. And so to date we've contributed to 16 global financial institutions, including large banks and also large global reinsurers. So reinsurers being very important for the insurance industry as a whole, because they insure the insurance companies that we're probably most likely as individuals to have contact with. So those aspects of our work have become the mainstay of our approach.
Interesting. I wonder if I can ask you about just terminologically, is advocacy different than activism? Is it just...
I think that's a really fine distinction. I'm not really clear on what the difference is. Activism, I guess, for me personally, and one could Google this probably, that conjures up more images of direct action on the ground.
Yeah.
And our organisation hasn't really participated in those kinds of actions so much. We haven't been out on flotillas of boats holding up banners. So to me, activism is more about that direct action on the ground. We don't tie ourselves to tractors or mining machines or go out to sea as an organisation. We don't have the capacity for that. We don't have the resources. We're a small, tight, but experienced and productive organisation. And our forte is that connection with community organisations on the ground and building solidarity with those, and research, and whether that's finance advocacy or our science-based advocacy.
I wonder if you can talk for a moment about the role of advocacy. Often, especially I think in the deep sea mining conversations that I'm involved in, because I work for a research organization, people think, well, what we need research, and we need the policymakers to listen to the research, and we need the industry actors to follow the recommendations of good policy, which is based on good research. And so, but I speak to people all across who are actually involved, and they say, the advocacy organizations are actually really important to provide balance and to play a role. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what you see the role of advocacy as in this question and similar questions.
Well, if I just backtrack a little bit to when I first started working on environmental issues for the Australian Conservation Organisation, which is an advocacy organisation, I came to that straight out of being a PhD research scientist. And I thought, and now I view that as being rather naive, but I thought what people need is to know the truth about a situation and the impacts. And of course, once they understand that a mining project or a logging project is causing really dire harm to the environment, they will respond in a really responsible manner and manage that project appropriately. To my shock and horror, I found out that people don't respond to truth. And in fact, truth is at a premium today in today's climate, especially with President Trump in the US, and the influence of that is far more widespread than just other governments, which is bad enough, but we've noticed it spreading to corporations. There's a lot of flexibility around truth and reality. And so I see the role of what we do with our advocacy as really speaking that old adage, speaking truth to power. And we do not have the power in this situation. We are not the cashed up large government entities or corporate entities. So our work is about trying to message our truth in a way that other people can hear and to motivate other people to act on it. Because just putting it out there as a report without a message and framing it in a certain way so people understand that this is an issue that needs to have a particular response, it doesn't work to address the problem.
Just publishing a scientific paper on an issue doesn't move the needle very much.
Advocates like us who, have respect for science and for truth, we will use the scientific papers that are published by scientists in order to inform ourselves and provide the facts that underpin our advocacy. So our organisation and those of our colleagues that we work with, are very, very disciplined, I think, on actually underpinning our work with actual scientific peer-reviewed papers and research.
So then part of this is what I guess I think of as the dissemination link. Like in research, you do research and then you publish a study and then you have to disseminate that study so people actually become aware of it. So part of the advocacy link that you're saying is you try to take that dissemination and make it into action and positive action that would follow from the logic of the research. And then I suppose another side of this is trying to direct some research to places where it's needed, but isn't motivated from other research funding sources. Research doesn't always naturally happen in the places that it's needed. Funding comes from certain places, and those places are always focused on whatever it is they're motivated by. So I suppose that another part of your work is to try to direct some research to places that you feel that it's not focused on enough.
Yeah, well, we try to be, because we have limited resources, we try to be very strategic and fill gaps in research. And because our research isn't peer reviewed in the way that scientists' research is, the gaps that we're trying to fill are not so much scientific gaps. We don't do original research, but what we try to do is piece together the research that is available and sometimes identify where more research is required, very much so with deep sea mining, where there's huge information gaps on the impact of deep sea mining and on our understandings of how the deep ocean, and in fact, the ocean in general operates. So, yes, we do try to be very strategic. We collaborate with our Pacific partners who are opposing deep sea mining to work out with them what research would be useful for them in their work as well. So we have a collaborative approach to identifying and co-developing research outputs.
Great. Then one of the questions that I'd like to ask you is, because you've been involved in the deep sea mining topic for much longer than I've been, aware of it. So I wonder if you can describe the change that you've seen in the deep sea mining conversation over the time that you've been involved, if it has really picked up in the last years and what that's been like.
Well, when we started our campaign, we started with this single focus on the Solwara 1 mine in Papua New Guinea, and we saw that as a precedent. So apart from the fact that two of us working closely together on this issue were based in Australia and we had strong links with Papua New Guinea anyway, we saw this was the first licensing of a commercial seabed mining project. And we saw that as seeing the precedent. And at that time, we felt like the eyes of the world and of other potential deep sea mining companies were watching really closely what was happening in Papua New Guinea with the Solwara 1 mine. So that's where we focused our efforts. But it didn't take too many years. It was probably, 5 years after we started that work, that there just seemed to be this frenzy of exploration licenses being granted in the Pacific Ocean, in that area of the Pacific Ocean between Kiribati and Hawaii on one side and Mexico on the other, called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, or the CCZ. And today we have the CCZ pretty much as a patchwork. It's about 5,500 kilometres across that stretch of ocean. And it's pretty much, if you look on our maps from the International Seabed Authority, you'll see it's pretty much a patchwork of licenses granted to about 18 different entities. And some of those entities are companies like the Metals Company. Some of them are state-owned entities. Some of them are hybrids entities between, collaborations between consortium between companies and government. So I guess the whole area has really just expanded as an issue. And as a result of that, to be honest, when I started doing this work, I felt like there was a really strong chance that we would be able to close down this industry, which is not wanted by communities who are going to be affected, is not needed, before it started to devastate the relatively intact environments of the deep sea bed. Today, I no longer feel that level of confidence. The window for closing down the industry before it starts is quite narrow now. And I think one particular company, initially at least, was responsible for driving this rush towards developing regulations for seabed mining at the International Seabed Authority. and that is the metals company. And we've been tracking Gerard Barron, who's the CEO of the metals company, way back from his days with Nautilus.
Can you tell us what happened in the Solwara case? That was the first attempt at commercial seabed mining. And maybe just start by telling people what actually happened with that project.
Over several years, the Nautilus, which was the company behind a Canadian registered company that was behind the Solwara 1 project, it couldn't raise the funds it needed. Seabed mining is an incredibly expensive enterprise with really high risks. Even if you kind of put aside environmental risks, the the risks of technology failing, the risks of actually not turning a profit are pretty high because it's a speculative industry at heart. And so this Nautilus couldn't raise the funds it required to pursue the development of its licenses and to see it through to a commercial enterprise. Gerard Barron and a couple of other Australians actually, I think they saw the writing on the wall quite early and jumped ship, left Nautilus, and they left Nautilus quite wealthy because when they started with not very much money, they were able to really promote. Gerard Barron being a marketing guru and very good at his job. He was actually doing the rounds of all sorts of international conferences and meetings and financiers. He wasn't so successful with the financiers, but he did manage to ramp up the share price of Nautilus. So when he left, he sold his shares and he and others, and they left relatively wealthy compared to when they started. But they left the PNG government, who was also a shareholder in the enterprise, and the two other major shareholders holding the baby. And this baby was going down the gurgle. The company limped along for a few years and before it declared bankruptcy. The issue for us was we never knew, there was never any transparency. There was never any transparency around the licensing conditions for Nautilus and the Solwara 1 project. And there was never any transparency about the details of the arrangements between the Papua New Guinea government and Nautilus. But we did know that they lost significantly. PNG was already a cash-strapped economy with lots of economic issues internally, lost a very significant amount of money. An economist calculated that it was equivalent to a third of the annual health or education budget for 1 year. So that for Papua New Guinea is a very significant amount of money. But Gerard Barron and his friends went on to form a company called Deep Green, and they had their eye on exploration licenses in the CCZ, in the Pacific Ocean. And so they took up those licenses and then decided to become a public company. So they did a reverse merger with another company to become what is now known as the Metals Company. And it's a public company. And my guess is that Gerard is pretty sorry that he went public, because when you go public, when a company goes public, they are required by law to report in a public fashion and to also register with the Security Exchange Commission. In this case, it's the one in the US. A serious analysis of risk. So if one were to actually look at the filings, and anyone can look at the filings submitted by a company like the Metals Company to the Security Exchange Commission and compare that to their public relations, you would see a vast difference. So their public relations glosses over the problems, both environmental and economic, financial, whereas the disclosure documents with the SEC are very realistic on all those risks, and in fact, are in agreement to a very large extent with ourselves on just about every issue we've ever commented on relating to the risk of deep sea mining.
Okay, so then in terms of the development of the deep sea mining industry or industry in utero, it was some combination of the marketing and the activity of this deep green that you feel drove this land grab for the nodule area of the Pacific Ocean.
Well, I think it was geopolitics that drove the land grab. It's a bit like Antarctica, where, everyone wanted a piece of it and we managed to get a moratorium that's about to expire on mining there. But people just want to countries just want to have a foothold there in case, it turns out to be something useful for them. And so I don't think the metals company drove the land grab, but they have been driving the rush towards developing regulations for seabed mining.
Right.
International Seabed Authority. So these are regulations that would govern all aspects of how seabed mining is managed in international waters, such as the CCZ is. And
I wonder if you can give just a very brief overview. So the International Seabed Authority is a UN organization that is responsible for...
The ISA, the International Seabed Authority, comes under the umbrella of the United Nations, but it is a kind of independent authority. It has 168 members, and the EU is also a member, so 168 nation states are members of the ISA. The relationship between the ISA and the rest of the UN and all the other UN-related conventions and fora is misaligned. There doesn't ever seem to be an alignment between what's the conversations that are happening around marine biodiversity in other fora and what's happening at the UN. And the UN was established under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea to manage the resources of the deep sea bed, but also to safeguard and protect the environment of the deep sea bed. And the management of both, the mandate is to manage both in the interests of all of humankind. So that's the mandate of the ISA. Until late last year, there was a Secretary General of the ISA, Michael Lodge, who presided in that position for, I'm not exactly sure how long, but for all the time that we've been looking at deep sea mining. Perhaps, I don't know if it's as long as a couple of decades, but quite a long time. And early on in the piece, the ISA was this little-known authority. It was very obscure. It's tucked away in Jamaica. And they got away with quite a lot. The Secretariat, it has been shown by exposés in Bloomberg and New York Times, some well-researched exposés, showing the level of collusion and collaboration between the Secretary-General and mining companies, and particularly Nautilus, Deep Green, and the Metals Company have had a very close relationship with Michael Lodge. And, their pathway to gaining licenses was quite facilitated. And
can you explain just a little bit? So you mentioned, so I didn't intend us to get into the details of the ISA, but I think it's relevant that people understand a little bit how that works. And so you mentioned that this Clarion-Clipperton Zone, which is the area of most interest for nodule mining in the Pacific, has been kind of claimed with exploration licensing, which kind of gives the claimant a right to have exclusive activity in that zone. But of course, there's no mining yet. There's not a right to exploit the minerals in that zone. It's just, but they've got the rights to that zone for the time being. And you mentioned that some of those are owned by commercial enterprise and some are by national governments and some are joint. And can you just explain a little bit the rules around who is allowed? Because I didn't actually know. I thought that each commercial enterprise had to be in partnership with a sponsoring nation.
Indeed. So sponsoring each entity that holds exploration license in the international waters requires a nation state to sponsor it, with preference given to small developing island states. So what we've seen in the Pacific, and again I go back to talking about is the metals company, is that it has access to vast swathes of the Pacific Ocean through sponsorship arrangements with Nauru and Tonga. Previously also with Kiribati, but that relationship is under a bit of ambiguity about how it was ended. That relationship, contractual relationship, has ended now. So, yes, so indeed, those two. So what we kind of see is that this one company has kind of had a approach to the, picking off a couple of small cash-strapped island states to partner with it in deep sea mining. So the contracts they hold are not transparent, but one did fall off the back of a truck for Tonga, and there's a very good analysis that's publicly available via the Civil Society Forum of Tonga of the content of the draft contract that we believe was then shortly after signed by the then Prime Minister of Tonga. And that contract is very much in the favour of the mining company, Tonga Offshore Minerals Limited, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the metals company, and really disadvantages Tonga in many different aspects. The issue is really that it's not just today's Tongans and today's decision makers that will be held to this contract, but in perpetuity until TOML decide themselves to end the contract. The Tongan government is considering recommendations from civil society to end the contract itself, because whatever penalties may be applied by the metals company to ending that contract, they believe are going to be far less than the impacts and the costs of going ahead with deep sea mining for tourism and fisheries, and also just all the arguments against the speculative nature of deep sea mining. We don't really know what the returns are going to be, or we don't really know the costs. And in fact, these are some of the risks that are outlined by the metals company itself in its security filings. They say exactly that.
Okay, great. This is a good segue to kind of the main reason I wanted to have you on the podcast today was to give the argument against deep sea mining, or at least to give the position of one of the organizations that works to oppose deep sea mining. Let me, I guess, ask you from your perspective or the perspective of the deep sea mining campaign, what is the right amount of deep sea mining?
Well, that's very easy for me to answer, because no amount of deep sea mining is the perfect amount of deep sea mining, zero deep sea mining. And I say that, it sort of sounds a bit glib, but I say that based on 13 years of looking at the science around the impacts of deep sea mining as it's been slowly emerging. And it has been relatively slow to emerge because it's very expensive to research the deep sea as well. But what we do know from the science, and we actually commissioned a couple of scientists from James Cook University in Australia to do a literature review for us a few years ago, looking at the best available science at that time and to analyse it for us and to provide conclusions from their perspectives as marine biologists as to what the science tells us about the risks. And so what that piece of research shows, and it's on our website, that report can be downloaded on our website, Predicting the Impact of Nodule Mining in the Pacific Ocean, is that the scientific consensus is that the impacts of deep sea mining are likely to be very severe, very long term, and in fact, in human timeframes, many of those impacts will be irreversible. And I can run through all those things if you want in detail, but I think you've probably got other people speaking to those, but I'm happy to do that. And our report outlines the science behind that conclusion.
Yeah. And so, that report is called Predicting the Impacts of Mining Deep Sea Polymetallic Nodules in the Pacific Ocean, a review of the scientific literature. And it is quite comprehensive and full of information. And I recommend that people who want those details, I think that's actually a great place to start with understanding kind of the science behind the risks. Yeah.
And I would just like to say that we kept our hands off as advocates against seabed mining. We kept our hands off the work that the scientists were doing. You will see our advocacy right at the end. After the conclusion, we have a message from us as a campaign organisation based on the conclusions. You know, in undertaking this research, we didn't know what the researchers were going to find there. So we didn't try to bias that research in any way. And because we don't have the resources and the time to undergo peer review processes with scientific journals, but for that report, we actually invited scientists, most of whom we didn't know before, and we didn't know what their view was going to be of this report, to review the report for us, which they did, and actually strengthened it by adding more references and citations that the scientists could refer to. And they agreed to put their name to the report as reviewers. So they were anthropologists to fisheries, Pacific fisheries scientists to deep sea ecologists, and probably someone else in there that I can't remember right now. So we feel like it was a really, it was a big undertaking from our point of view. And I think it was, and this is what, I mean by, that we strategically target our resources. We felt like this at that time, there wasn't something as comprehensive as this. It reviewed over 250 pieces of peer-reviewed and other documentation around deep sea mining. Since that time, there have been other similar reviews published in the scientific literature, but I think ours was ahead of the game, and I still refer to it all the time as a really handy resource document. It covers all aspects of impacts of deep sea mining, including on what we might expect around carbon cycles in the deep sea and climate change. And from that time, of course, we watch what comes out in science and the literature that's emerged since our report came out, I think 3 to 4 years ago now. And all I've seen is science that strengthens the arguments for that report. There's been no independent science that's come out saying, hey guys, it's all, there's nothing to worry here. It's all going to be cruisy, That comes from the companies. You will see that from the metals company, but you will not see that from independent scientists that subject their work to peer review.
It occurs to me to ask also, so that report, and I suppose a lot of your focus is on specifically the nodule mining. And so I guess two things. So a ban is different than a moratorium, which is the stance of a lot of other organizations that work in advocacy, kind of opposing deep sea mining. But you feel confident in advocating for a ban. And then, the second part of that is, do you feel that way specifically about the nodule situation, or do you apply that same confidence to opposing deep sea mining in the other seafloor massive sulfides or manganese crusts context?
Well, in Papua New Guinea, at the Solwara 1 site, they're hydrothermal vents, which are like underwater geysers that produce these seafloor massive sulfides, these huge deposits that have formed over thousands of years. This sort of like sulfidic ash containing metals. And I guess we do feel confident, to support a ban. And that position for a ban is really, we're closely attuned and with our collaborators, and we take our cue from our Pacific partners as to what they want. And so they've come out very strongly for a ban. And in fact, France also has declared a ban on seabed mining too. It's the only nation state that has. We support a moratorium as well, but we view that as, a tool towards a ban, because the idea of a moratorium is to provide to stop deep sea mining while we undertake more research to understand more of the impacts. And I suppose I still have that little tiny bit of a naive scientist in me that hopes, at least, that when the truth about those impacts is widely known amongst decision makers and civil society, the right decision will be made and we will have a ban. The other aspect of being comfortable to support a ban is that we don't need this industry. You know, our master spin doctor, Gerard Barron, for quite a while was, running the line that, hey, we're all environmentalists in this together. And, we're all about producing enough metals to have a transition to a zero carbon or carbon neutral economy, and once there's enough metals in the system, we'll be able to engage with a circular economy. We won't need to do deep sea mining anymore. Well, I don't know if anyone's done the analysis to look at how many metals or what volume and quantities of different metals are in our global system at the moment. But most of those metals are not being recycled right now. There's an appallingly low rate of recycling, say, batteries for these critical minerals that we require for more batteries. And just in the last couple of weeks, Gerard Barron was quoted in an interview he did for a Dutch documentary. He was asked whether the arguments around the transition, needing the minerals for a transition to a carbon neutral economy was greenwashing. And he kind of hedged around that, but he ended up admitting, well, it kind of looks like greenwashing. So in that, he's admitting to his own spin being greenwashing, and he's moved on. He's moved on to selling the minerals as now being essential for national security in military. I prefer to actually name that for what it is, which is to go into the whole military complex to make armaments and bombs that get dropped and kill other people. So this is where deep sea mining, the latest spin on deep sea mining is heading. So where is the need? Where is the need for deep sea mining? We still have plenty of reserves on land. We're not very well looking after the environmental management of our land-based mines. Our position has always been that, and my personal position has always been that we need a small number of very well managed land-based mines and maximum recycling, and so, well, let's do the sums at least to start off with, to see where that lands us in terms of what minerals do we actually need, like as a global society. There is absolutely no need to dig up the deep sea bed to provide the minerals we need for transition to a carbon neutral economy.
Yeah, well, those are the two talking points in favor of deep sea mining that I think you've responded to. So the one is basically that we need the minerals, that we can't recycle our way to the kind of mineral demands that we're looking at for transition to a green society or whatever we need the critical minerals for. And then the other is that deep sea mining is preferable to land-based mining. And so I think if I can summarize your points, it's that before we head into the deep sea, we need to maximize our circular economy, retain all the minerals that we have currently in the system, and improve our land-based mining so that it's not a question of the lesser of two evils. Mining is inherently destructive, but if we can make it the least destructive, and then just stay out of mining in the deep sea entirely.
Well, and the arguments around land-based versus deep-sea mining in terms of impacts was recently examined by a paper which didn't find evidence that deep-sea mining was going to be less impactful for the environment overall than land-based mining. And in fact, I refer back to the security SEC filings by the metals company, where they actually state that clearly in the risks, their risk section of that there is that it's possible that deep sea mining will have the same or greater level of impact than land-based mining. So this is again a matter of distinguishing between the public relations and the spin, and actually look at what a company like the deep sea, like the metals company, actually files and where it's forced to be honest because there's legal repercussions if it's not. They're quite different stories. And so what is TMC about and why is it driving this rush towards the ISA? Just in the same Dutch video, Gerard Barron is quoted as threatening, and this cannot be taken as anything other than bullying the member states of the International Seabed Authority by stating that, well, I might very well just make my application to the US, and we've got an administration in the US right now that's extremely sympathetic, and so if it gets too hard at the ISA, this is what I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, and we didn't mention earlier when you said that the ISA has 169 or so, or member states, that the US isn't one of them. The US didn't sign on to the International Seabed Authority.
No, it's not a member. But apparently there are some exploration licenses or claims it's given itself in the CCZ some years ago. And yeah, I think that's all a little bit murky and people don't really know the status of those claims, but it does look like it might overlap with some of the licenses for exploration that the ISA has itself already issued. So it's if TMC carries through that threat, it's a worry, because the ISA is at least trying to develop a set of regulations by which this industry can be managed and not turn it into a free-for-all.
Yeah, this really hints at the importance of and kind of the fragility of international governance as it is, because international governance works as long as everybody agrees to let it work. And the moment that people start to say, well, I don't like those rules, I'm going to just play by my own, or go find someone else who gives me rules that I like better, then we lose a whole lot of international cooperation, which some point out is becoming more and more important as our world becomes more interdependent. That's very interesting.
And if the metals company is willing to make that threat to all those nation-state members of the International Seabed Authority, like what kind of standover tactic will it use with a small Pacific Island state to get its way? So Kiribati, who no longer has the contract with the metals company, I think might have had quite a lucky escape.
Unfortunately, due to a technical issue on my end, we lost the final few minutes of audio from my conversation with Dr. Rosenbaum. Before we wrapped up, Helen mentioned several valuable resources where listeners can follow her work and the organizations. So I strongly encourage you to visit the Deep Sea Mining Campaign's website, dsm-campaign.org, where you can find detailed reports, including the comprehensive literature review we discussed today. You can also follow the campaign on X, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Additionally, Helen recommended the film Blue Peril, a short documentary produced in partnership with the Deep Sea Mining Campaign, highlighting critical environmental and social issues surrounding deep sea mining in the Pacific. I've included links to all of these resources in the show notes. I'd like to sincerely thank Dr. Rosenbaum for sharing her time and insights with me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and particularly since we got cut off at the end, I look forward to inviting Helen back for another discussion in the future. Thanks for listening to the Elements of Deep Sea Mining. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps others discover these conversations.